everybody. Welcome to another interview with Jason and Justin. We are joined today by
Jason and Justin,
legendary Hollywood art designer. We got Joe Alves joining us today. Joe, how are you doing today?
Good. Everything's good.
Joe has been a part of some pretty big things, but as always with these conversations, I like to find out what certain aspects of Hollywood or roles in Hollywood are and what that job entails. So, can you tell us what an art director is?
Well, okay, I want to get to the Art Directors Society. They have a production designer that used to be a very special, let's say, how does it differ from art director? A special credit, but that changed probably in the 70s, and pretty much everybody that was an art director was a production designer, and that sort of headed the department. When if it was a big movie, you would have an art director working under you, assistant art director, and then you'd have set designers, illustrators, and construction people. So production designer gets the script, breaks it down, and he's responsible for everything pretty much visual. In other words, the locations, finding the locations, coordinating with the director. For an example, on Jaws, it was a very, very small movie. And so I didn't have a location scout. I scouted all the East Coast by myself. I designed all the sets and I did all the storyboards. In a bigger movie, like let's say Close Encounters, I had Danny Lamino as my art director. I was production designer. I had a number of set designers. I had George Jensen, who was a great illustrator. And then I had a whole crew. So today, I've noticed that on the new Star Wars, they had like dozens of art directors, huge. So they take care of very specific things. But basically, so as the designer, you're responsible for everything visual, coordinating colors with the wardrobe department, the costume designers, working with the props, so they coordinate. So that's basically it. I mean, you have the director, production designer, the director of photography, and those are like three key people.
Mm-hmm. So what was your job on the set of Jaws, the first one?
Well, Jaws was interesting in that I started on the movie before Steven Spielberg. Yeah, that's pretty unusual because generally the director has a big part in hiring their key people. But what happened was David Brown, who was the producer, Zanuck and Brown, and I had worked with them on Steven's first theatrical film, Sugarland Express. And David's wife, Helen Gurley Brown, was a publisher of Cosmopolitan. And she was reading different galleys. And she read this galley sheet of a book to be published called Jaws. And she said, David, this might make a pretty good movie. So David called me and said, Joe, if I send you the galleys, see, I was a staff art director. So, as a staff art director, in those days, there was a head of the art department, and they told you what you were going to do. They assigned you. So I was working on a television movie. And so David said he didn't have a charge number, but he said, could you fit this in between your other jobs? And I went to the head of the art department, the supervising art director. And in fact, it was Zanuck and Brown, and, they were bigwigs in the film industry. He said, go ahead, yes. So I took the galley sheets, basically the book, and I made about 30 illustrations, 11 by 16 in charcoal. They're all in my book. If you've ever seen my book, they're the first words in the front of the book. Anyway, so that was the beginning. And then Stephen was on the lot. He had an office there, and I would go over and talk to him. And I said, I'm working on this interesting project, about sharks. And he wanted to do a pirate movie or something. Anyway, but we talked about it. If we were going to do this, we weren't going to do a sort of a rubber shark in the backlot lake against a painted background. We were going to do a full-size shark, a very, very large shark in the real ocean. And that was sort of, nobody had done that. After the Zanuck and Brown had interviewed some people about directing it, one guy kept calling it a whale. And in any case, they didn't go with him. They decided to go with Steven. And that was great. So what's interesting is I took all these drawings and we had a meeting. And in my book, I saved everything. I don't know why. I just put it in a footlocker. And there was a note for the lady that took the phone calls. And she said, meeting in Marshall Green's office at 10 o'clock, October 3rd, 1973. So in that meeting, there were all the department heads. That's the way it worked at the studio system. The head of the camera, editing, special effects, art department, and so on. And Zanuck and Brown and Steven Spielberg in Marshall's office. And Marshall sort of liked this project because he lived on a boat, so he sort of related to the water. So I did the presentation, going shot by shot, and the shark does this, and the shark breaks the boat, the shark does that. And I was saying, Steve and I are talking about the biggest white shark was probably recorded 20, 21 feet. And we figured something bigger because one is large. In any case, after I did my spiel, Marshall looked to the effects department and said, can you make the shark? And they said, no one's ever done that. No one's ever made a full-size shark, hydraulic and all that, to go in the real ocean because it's too unpredictable. So they said, besides we were doing, other movies that more important and whatever. And so Marshall got pretty upset and said, Jaws could be, a successful movie. Everybody sort of laughed because it was just a small shark movie. When everybody left, I was picking up my drawings. Marshall called me and he said, can you get the shark made? And being young and ambitious, I said, well, I'll certainly try. He said, well, just put a team together and take it off the lot. Now, that was never done because everything was done in-house. So he said, find a team and go off and make it someplace. So my responsibility as a production designer was a little extended. Not only that I had to put together an effects crew, I had to design the shark, research it with ichthyologists. I made a model and put a team together. And I found Bob Matty and 6 other guys, Roy Arbogast, the Wood Brothers. And so I was responsible for coordinating the shark as well as designing the set. So it was a pretty full plate on that film.
So
that's how it started.
Point. It's an incredible story. And I mean, think about creation of the shark, and I imagine there were several different sharks, and I believe there's a couple of them. What determined whether or not you needed to create a whole new model or kept using the same one you already created, or however many iterations of the shark there were, right?
3 sharks.
3 sharks.
And the reason there are 3 sharks is that, let me see if I could find this. I don't know offhand, I'm not. The shark had, let's say, one side had to be open. I don't have the picture handy here. In other words, so if you have, first of all, let's say this. The shark turned out to be 25 feet. And the reason it was 25 feet is because, let me show you. This is a picture of the one I modeled. Sure. That was 4 feet. And this is a breakdown of a real shark and size by inches. Now, Leonard Campanile was an ichthyologist out of the San Francisco Oceanographical Studies. And he said the perfect shaped shark, white shark, is 12 feet. And as they get bigger, they get girthy. So we took the 12-foot and doubled it. So it was streamlined. And how we did this is Stephen and I decided we were going to make this shark, but we were going to sort of not be totally responsible for the size. So I had somebody in the art department make a 20-foot shark line drawing and a 30-foot. And we took these and put them down in the parking lot under building. And then we had all the executives and stuff come and look at it. And they said, oh, the 20 doesn't look that big. Oh, the 30 looks too big. And I says, how about something in between, like 25? And they said, that sounds good. So now we were making a 25-foot shark, and we had all the executives okayed it, like they were part of it. All right, so we needed a shark that could move pretty fast next to the boat. And so we towed it 300 feet away. So in other words, if you're the camera, you're towing this way, but on the backside is all open so you could get to all the mechanics. So we needed a left to right shark and a right to, left shark. That's two sharks. Then we needed a shark we could really control. And that was, Bob made a big barge, and he had these barrels that you turn them over and they sink. So on the barge, there was a track and then a crane so that the shark could come and attack something. So we could make it very, very specific where it hit. Now, this gave us a problem. When I scouted Martha's Vineyard, not only was I looking for a quaint little village, I also was looking for a section of the ocean where I could see out in the horizon that was fairly calm, that was 25 feet deep, because that's what the barge had to be. If it was, and I needed a place that had a very small tide, So in other words, if it was a 2-foot tide, was perfect. If it was a big tide, then you wouldn't see the shark, or if it came down, you would see all the mechanisms. So anyway, Martha's Vineyard was perfect because it had Vineyard Haven, it had Edgartown, it had Menemsha, it had these great villages, but it had this bay with this 25-foot depth and 2-foot tide. The tides on the west coast were like 12 feet. So that made it perfect as a location, I thought, in the winter. But I was surprised in the summer when I saw all the boats out there. But in any case, that's why we had the 3 sharks. And that seemed to be sufficient,
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
So when you come back for Jaws 2, do you remake the shark, or do you guys work with what you've already got?
Let me tell you what happened there. I was doing Close Encounters, and we had such a bad time. Martha's Vineyard was perfect, except doing the shark in the summer, and that was another thing too. Let me just say this. When I started building the shark, and I put the team together, we didn't start it until probably November, December, and all the shark experts, I went to Disney, and they said it would take a year and a half to make this shark, because they had to experiment it, never been tested. So when the book came out in February of '74, the studio said, we're going to start shooting in 2 months. And I said, wait a minute, that gives me 4 or 5 months to make the shark. I need a year and a half. I'm not going to be able to test it. This is the problem. So we just charged ahead, Bob and his crew, and got it. As soon as we got set up in Martha's Vineyard, we set the sharks there, and they weren't finished. And so, but the problem was, it was so cold. They started shooting 1st of May in the ocean, and it was freezing cold. It was just terrible. And then when we were ready to do the shark in June or July, we shot everything we could because the shark wasn't ready, because we would test it, and we would find the electronics water would get in it, and that wouldn't work. So it was just a lot of testing we didn't have a chance to do. In any case, July through August, suddenly that beautiful, peaceful ocean was just loaded with boats. It came in from Hyannisport and all over, and that was a popular place to go. And so Stephen was very, 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 very strong about it. He didn't want to see any boats out. He wanted these guys totally isolated. That's why they broke the radio. So, it was just the 3 of them and the shark. So that made it extremely difficult. Now, getting back to Jaws 2, when I was doing Jaws 2 in Pensacola, it was a beautiful beach, wonderful sand, and there was nobody out there. There was just nothing out there. And I said, if we ever do a Jaws 2, we should do all the shark stuff near Pensacola. Well, I got back to the studio, and they had hired John Hancock as the director. And he had, unlike Jaws 1, where we did everything away from the studio, they started doing everything at the studio. So by the time I got there, John had told them, I want the shark to flip around and do all these things. We spent $250,000 to make the shark on the first one. Now that it's in the studio, by the time I got there, they'd already spent $2 million on the shark.
Oh my goodness.
And what happened was, they had so little interest in Jaws, the first one, the studio. When we brought the sharks back, they just put them in the back lot and let them rot. They sold the boat, the Orca, because who cares? And then the movie came out, and it's a huge success. So they had to go buy the boat back. They took the original mold and made a fiberglass shark, and they hung that up in the tour section. And there's another story about that, because it has been restored, and it's going to go into the new Academy Museum. So anyway, Jaws 2, when I got involved with it, we had to make all new sharks. I mean, we had the structure, we had the mold, and we knew pretty much what we were going to do. And the fact that we had already tested the first one, so we're well on the way. We were back in the East Coast, and I was showing John the locations and stuff. Anyway, long story short, we had a crew in Martha's Vineyard for the second one, and then we had the shark was going to be in Florida. And while I was away, I was starting, because John was got behind, I started doing second unit directing. And I was visiting the shark and see how they were doing. And then I found out they fired John. And they fired him for various reasons. But I remember the first or second day of shooting, he was going to wrap at 3 o'clock, and there was still sunlight till 7. And Tom Joyner, who was the production manager was the first assistant on the first Jaws, production manager on the second. We went down and we said, John, you can't, he's got too much light. I was also associate producer on this picture, so I had more problems, and a second unit director. So they basically they got rid of John, and they were going to shut down the movie. And then there was talk about maybe Verna Fields, who was the editor, won the Academy Award, and me co-directing because we were so familiar with the subject. But the directors union wouldn't let you do that. In other words, if you were on a picture and they fired the director, you couldn't take over. You know, I mean, because they would do that if they had a problem, then the cameraman would take over. So there's a rule there. So anyway, basically they were going to shut it down, and then I went to the head of production, and I recommended Jano Schwark because he was a director I worked with on night galleries, and he did a lot of night galleries, and he seemed to be very prepared, and we needed someone who could start right away, not hire. They were talking about hiring, you know, some big name directors. I said, if you do that, we're going to have to start from the beginning, you know, because they'll want everything their way, as opposed to bring a guy in and his like first big feature and saying, this is what we've got, work with it. And that's what Jano did. So that's how Jaws went about, you know. And then I ended up directing because we were shut down for a number of weeks. Then we have to start up again. We brought Carl Gottlieb in to rewrite the script. And then because I ended up directing 85 Days a Second Unit, a lot of the action stuff with the shark. So that was a long shoot. That one ended up more difficult in many ways. Even though the shark was working, the studio thought because Jaws was so successful, they want to see more shark, which was not what we did on the first one because we wanted to keep it more mysterious, you know. Anyway, what else you got?
I wanted to ask, because you became the head director of Jaws 3, which was your last involvement with the franchise as well. So
Yes.
What was the experience like directing Jaws 3, and then why didn't you return for Jaws the Revenge?
Oh, yes. Okay. What happened was I was working on a picture in New York called The Ninja. I worked on it for 6 or 7 months with Scott in Japan and all that. And it was a Fox film, and Fox was sold, and the new owner canceled everything that wasn't shooting. So I came back, and I went to see Verna Fields. She's now a vice president, and she had an office there, and we'd go hang out. And she said, Joe, they were going to do this thing, Jaws 3, People Zero. In other words, a movie making fun of the people that made their biggest, most successful film. And that was really in bad taste. And they had some good people involved in it. And I think not knowing for sure that Spielberg got involved in saying, look, you make this. And, you know, he wasn't going to be happy with that. So Zanuck and Brown got rid of the franchise, basically. That was it. 2 was enough for them. The studio sold the franchise to Alan Landsberg, who was a primarily low-budget television producer and did things like That's Incredible, whatever. So Verna said, Joe, go talk to Alan and see if you could get involved and save the franchise because this guy's really low budget. So I went to him and he said, well, maybe you could produce it. I said, no, either I direct it because I was so used to, you know, directing on Jaws 2. And I said, we're going to have to build a shark. Oh, no, I've got a lot of stock footage of sharks. So his idea was taking stock footage of sharks and really making a cheap movie. So anyway, I got involved. Richard Matheson was the writer. We scouted. It was theme parks, water theme parks. And we were in Florida. And there was an exhibit of underwater through the kelp and stuff. And it was in 3D. And so I was with Richard and I came out and he said, what, Jaws in 3D? I said, no, Jaws 3D. You got the Jaws, you got the 3, and you add the D. It sort of really gets people interested because you're not You know what I mean? It sort of
Yeah.
fools them a little bit. Oh, Jaws 3D. So that's how that started. Now, let me tell you, I had a lot of problems with Alan because he was one of these producers that thought he's also a director. And so I had to keep him away because he tried to give me shots all the time. I said, no, we got a storyboard. Here's what we're doing. But we had old cameras. We had, I mean, nothing new. And the cameraman kept calling it an ultra jam because, you know, anyway, we got Aeroflex to make us some new cameras, underwater and small 3D cameras. But we still had the over and under. So we took the format, the white format, and we cut that in half. And the top would be left, the bottom would be right. So I'm working with an incredibly wide format. Now, most people have seen it on television, but if you saw it in the film, in the movies, it was, you know, it was big, you know, like, you know, a wide format. In any case, the big problem was the convergence, trying to get, you know, things. And so it was an extremely difficult shoot. I had a good crew, Dennis and John Pudge, and I sort of discovered Leah Thompson. She had never done anything before, and she was very energetic. And she came, and the online producer was Rupert Hitchcock, who was from New York, and they weren't crazy about her. But then we went and we went and casting in New York, and she pops up again, says, "Oh, I thought you guys wanted to see me," and I said, "I really like this girl," so I gave her her first job, and so the cast and crew were great. Jimmy Cotner was the cameraman. He was the loader for the first Jaws. So basically, the crew was good, the cast was good, the producer was very difficult, and 3D was just a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. After Jaws 3, I didn't want to get involved with any more sharks, you know.
That makes sense. So
and that one wasn't too successful, you know.
So another Steven
actually
Spielberg
made a lot of money. Pardon?
Oh no, you're okay. Another Steven Spielberg movie, though. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like, can you kind of explain what your involvement was with that and the art direction, everything going on with that movie?
Yeah, I was a production designer on that. That was interesting. Steven, he was going to do a thing called Bingo Long and his Traveling All-Stars. And this was after Jaws. And I had a friend who had a cabin in Mammoth. And Steven and I went skiing there. And it was a snowstorm and we got stuck. And so I had brought a lot of stuff. There was Bingo Long was about black baseball in the 30s. I brought Life magazines and stuff. And then he started reading about this new project he was working on called Watch the Sky. And based on Dr. Hynek's book, a UFO by Scientific Inquiry. And he started telling me about, you know, the UFOs and coming down and all that stuff. And I said, wow, this sounds more interesting than a black baseball movie. He says, yeah, but I don't have a deal. So, okay. Anyway, I went off and I did something between it called Embryo with Rock Hudson. Small movie, but it was fun. Rock was a super nice guy. For big star, it was amazing how nice he was. Anyway, when I finished that, Steven came to me, he says, we got a deal. Michael and Julia Phillips are going to produce it. We're going to do it for Columbia. So go over to Columbia and talk to the head of production there. What we need is a strange mountain. So John Veach was the head of production. Now, here again, no big movie, small sci-fi movie, okay? Mm-hmm. Maybe $3 million. And he said, everything's going to be shot on the stage or in the back lot, but you need to find some unusual mountain. So I got a map of Scenic USA, and it had all these various, mountains. And so Ship Rock and Chimney Rock and all that. And I went up to the National Monument, with all the faces are.
Mm-hmm.
And I started there in North Dakota. And I just sort of drove for miles, I think 3,000 miles, and so here again, no scouting, it was just me, again. And just like Jaws, I'm off by myself, taking notes and taking pictures. So I looked at all these things, and Carl Gottlieb had mentioned, he said, oh yeah, go look at Devil's Tower. And I looked at the thing, and I drove, and I saw this little funny peak, and then it disappeared, and I kept driving, and it got big. And then when I got there, I saw this huge, incredible looking thing, monolith.
Yeah.
And so I took pictures. In those days, today you scout, you get online and you look for mountains. I do pan shots, and then you tape them together. So I did, even though I liked Devil's Tower, I still presented a number of different places to Stephen. And without question, Devil's Tower was it. And we went and looked at it. Okay, so we got to go ahead. And John Veach said, okay, the idea with Close Encounters was that this very, very strange mountain. And what Stephen had written was a military encampment near it. And then the UFO was going to come and meet at that place. And I thought, well, maybe if it's so important that we're going to have this UFO, inquiry come, we should have a place. We should have this arena with all these technical equipments. So Stephen, yeah, that's a good idea. So John Veach took me to stage 15 and 16 on Warner Lot. This was shot Camelot. And he said, this is your stage, biggest stage we have. And I said, oh, it doesn't look big enough. And he says, what? Now Jaws had come out, and Jaws is now becoming a bigger movie. And now Stephen and I are people, oh, you guys did Jaws. And Jaws is huge success. So I said, okay, John, so I made a model of a stage that would fit. So it was interesting because Columbia was having some financial problems and they needed a big movie. And now this little this little sci-fi movie is getting bigger. And as our success in Jaws gets bigger, Stephen's concepts get bigger. And my set, so I show the set and I have all these executives come over to look at this set I'm going to put in 15 and 16. Mm-hmm. And they said, what do you think? And I said, I think it's too small. And then they said, how big do you think it should be? I said, 4 times this. And 4 times the biggest set. And so there's no sets.
Yeah.
Stage is that big. So anyway, I make a model 4 times. I have a crew. I have model makers. And, this is not just me alone. I've got Danny and I've got...
Were you pretty hands-on with the actual creating, though? Sorry to interrupt.
Pardon?
Were you pretty hands-on with creating it, or were you kind of just overseeing their creation?
No. I was the designer. Pretty much, Danny had never been... He was an assistant before, so I didn't have any high-level guys. I pretty well roughed it out and laid it out,
Gotcha.
It's the way, the way I work. I've always been a drawer. And anyway, so when I made the 4 times bigger, I had all the executives come again and, oh, wow, that's great. And I said, it's going to be so big, and we're going to just have little golf carts running around, no cars. So anyway, so they said, okay, great. Where are you going to build it? And I go, oh, well, there's no stage big enough. And Doug Trumbull was coming over to, he was going to do the effects. And what we needed to do to control all the effects, we had to have it inside. It all had to be covered.
Sure.
So it couldn't be done outside. We had to, control the light. So Scott Palo was the production manager. Very, very nice guy. I mean, Chuck Palo. Anyway, so we said, God, there's no stages. We started looking at airplane hangars.
Okay.
And there was one, we went up to Oregon, and it was great, but they had a lumber yard or something, cutting wood attached to it. That wasn't going to work. And then we looked at a couple back in Carolina. So we're looking at World War II Zeppelin hangars.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so the thing was a football field wide and a football field and a half long. That was the set. Because I had taken, Vilmar Zsigmond was now the director of photography, and we went to where they do the Rose Bowl, the field there, and he was checking the lights and how big the thing was going to be. So we found this thing in Mobile, Alabama, and they had 2 hangars, and they were 300 feet square. But the doors opened all the way, so I could extend it another 150 feet, and 6 stories of scaffolding and black backing and stuff. So that's how that started. So it grew. I mean, the whole movie went from a small not TV, but a small sci-fi movie to this bigger as
big thing,
because of Jaws.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway.
That's incredible.
And then it just, everything got bigger, on the other states. I built a road where they're driving through and they go off the road, and but they just drove around it. So I had to build a set that you could drive through and out at 40 miles an hour. So that was another build, and it just it went on like that, So it became a big picture. Unfortunately, it was supposed to open before Star Wars, and Trumbull had a lot of problems, and they did a lot of additions to the effects. So we actually really didn't get it released until November, which I think hurt us financially, because I think if we were, in the first part of the summer, because let me just say something about this Jaws the summer. Most, they were going to release Jaws on just a few theaters until we had the screening in Lakewood, and people were just going crazy, screaming. And so Lou Wasserman and the executives, they said, we got to release this thing big. So that was never done. 450 theaters was huge. Generally, they would release it to half a dozen or a dozen. So Jaws became the first summer blockbuster. And I was hoping that if we got Close Encounters in the summer, we could, with Star Wars, we could, but that didn't work out.
That's incredible. A Zeppelin hangar. I can't imagine all the stuff you had to build for that set. It's probably a ton of stuff.
It was incredible. Let me say this. Vilmos, I had such a, I don't have the illustrations here because I did another book called Close Encounters. Anyway, George's illustrations were so damn good that normally we, like I did all the storyboards for Jaws and their action things, but this we actually painted them. And if you take the illustration of the mothership landing and you see what Vilmos did, it looks exactly the same, because he would take the photographs, and we had mirrored mylar and 3,000 photo floods, and so then he put a fog thing, and so it just worked out fantastic. So it was incredible. Interesting, because Vilmos, when we did Sugarland, but he was a film, pretty successful
Yeah.
director of photography. And I was a television guy, he thought. But I did a few things on Land, which sort of surprised him. And Stephen kept saying, no, Joe did, a night gallery, and he really knows what he's doing. So after Jaws, when we did Close Encounters, our relationship was very, very close, very talented guy. But he had never done a picture. We had 48 arcs, now 48 arcs to just get to light the damn set. It was unbelievable, difficult film.
Would you say it was your hardest film to kind of craft a set for? Would you say so?
That's interesting. I didn't feel it's a process, so you just start off and you just do what you need to do. And so I'm trying to think, well, generally the movies are difficult if you have a director you don't get along with too well. But I had no problems. It just was a process. It took forever. On Close Encounters, just a rock, we had 14,000 square feet of rock, of fiberglass rock. It just went on and on to build the thing. Obviously, Jaws was difficult. Basically, I built the boats, or one boat. We had two boats, and one we redid, and I had Quint's shack and a few things like that. But yeah, I used to do 20, 25 sets a week on in night gallery. So movies are different, I would say a small movie I did, which turned out really sort of interesting, was Escape from New York, and that had a texture to it. Dean Cundy was an incredible cameraman, and working with John and Deborah, it was a different experience. So that was a lot of fun. That was sort of more low key, but we kept doing things, We wanted a certain look. We wanted a dark look. And with John, let me just tell you about John. John, it was similar in some ways to Hitchcock. I worked with Hitchcock and I remember Hitchcock calling me up to his office and asked about doing this and that. And he said, well, I want you to build a staircase here. Mr. Whitlock's going to put a backing there, and Mr. Newman walks up. And I said, well, Mr. Hitchcock, we don't call him Hitch. You got to be, and I didn't. And I said, what about the reverse shots and stuff? No. We just build what we're going to shoot. With John Carpenter, I would build a half a set. We built this set. It was supposed to be a street of New York. And we built in the desert because we couldn't afford a stage. And if you panned over to the left, there'd be cactus there. But that was fine with John. He shot, what he got. Yeah. And he pretty well knew what he was doing. So a lot of directors have you build all this stuff, and then you don't see it. They don't. Then they figure out what they want when they get on the set. And it's not the way to do it. You got to plan.
That was going to be our next question, was about Escape to New York. But I have to ask you now, what was Hitchcock like?
Oh, black suit, black tie. We all wore sport coats in those days. I'm talking, this is 1965. We get in the morning, we all meet at where we had the coffee on the set and donuts, and he would tell very unfunny jokes, and we're supposed to laugh. He was an art director in England before he became a director. So he really loved the art department. He liked to storyboard everything. By the time he got to shooting, it was sort of boring to him because he had everything pretty well planned. Yeah, we built a lot of sets yeah.
Did that make your job easier or harder that he already had a vision in mind for it? Did that make your job a lot easier? Did that make your job a lot easier, that his art background, or did it make it harder?
Yes, it did, because he would be in the art department and we would plan it, you know.
Mhm.
And so that was quite an experience. I was a young guy to work with Hitchcock, you know. I was very fortunate. You know, Hitchcock and Spielberg, and I'd say, you know, Carpenter. Yeah, it was a good experience.
It's amazing. So what was it like being on the Escape from New York set? Like, I know you briefly went over it, but like, it's a pretty big movie in its own right. What was that like?
That was interesting because Carpenter and Deborah Hill had done The Fog and Halloween, maximum $300,000 budgets, right?
Yeah.
I was not. I went through a period after Jaws 2 where I really wanted to direct, and I had scouted a movie I was going to do out in front. It was about Formula One racing, and I raced cars for 8 years, Formula cars, and so I scouted all over Europe with Bill Gilmore, a company, and so it looked pretty good, like I was going to direct this big race car movie. And I got back, and the company got sold. And then a couple of weeks later, my father died, and everything went downhill. And Phil Gerst, my agent, called me. He said, "Joe, you got to go to work." You know. Now I got this young couple, Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, and I represent them. And they got a movie called Escape from New York, and I think that you should design it for them. So I met with them, and now this is a big budget to them. It's $6 million, and I'm coming off of $25 million movies. So the thinking's quite different.
Sure.
Deborah's very ambitious. Oh, John is really laid back, maybe smoke a joint, take it easy. He's a very, very low-key guy, you know, but smart, but low-key. So I said, well, who's scouting locations? We need a bridge with a wall, or we need a wall and build a bridge. He said, well, we'll get to it. I said, well, yeah, but so this is me, you know, energy, gotta go. I've always said. So anyway, Barry Bernardi was going to discuss the locations. I said, well, we got to find a bridge that nobody's using. And John and I and Larry Franco, we went, because this was supposed to be New York. We went to the trade tower, got on top of the trade tower. We looked at New York, and we said, "There's no way we could control New York. I mean, this is too much." So when we heard about a bridge in St. Louis, and it was a great bridge, and nobody was using it, but downtown was urban renewal, and we could shoot downtown and do whatever we want with it. You know, put all the garbage we want. So New York became St. Louis, and I built this incredible wall. And here's the way it went. For an example, I built a big set in LA, where we have this big area. It's like a dam, but there's no water there.
Sure.
And so that was for the main operation headquarters. But there was an entry building where you come in, and that was supposed to be on Liberty Island. So we're so low, but I built this thing sort of an A-frame with a window here, United States Police Force. So I built it, and we put it on a truck, and we didn't ship it. We went all the way to Liberty Island. We waited till we could get on a barge or a ferry we didn't have to pay for, and then we set it up. And the Tommy Atkins so now we have the Statue of Liberty. He walks down there, comes through here, signs in, and then Dean Cundy is so great. And we're traveling across here. It's U.S. Police Force, and then it's just black. He cuts, measures the distance. We put it back on the trailer. We ship it to L.A. We set it up. He puts the camera there and continues the shot, and we're in L.A. That's the effects, really unbelievable. So it was such a smooth shot. And speaking of effects, this is interesting. And a friend of mine, Guy Magars, he's directed a lot of little independent movies, but he had this illustrator was working on some creatures for him. And in the meantime, we had to get effects, certain special effects. So I knew the people from Star Wars and various, and I took Deborah around and we interviewed these people. It was all just too much, you know. So I'm at this party and I meet this young guy and he says, you know, I work at a little studio there. I think we could do the effects for you, you know. Can't remember the name. Well, anyway, the young illustrator is Jim Cameron. And so Jim Cameron, who the hell is Jim Cameron, you know? God, I forget the name of it's a small studio that did a lot of independent films, very low budget, and they hired a lot of young directors. Anyway, so Cameron was doing basically all the effects for that company. Roger Corman, yes. Roger Corman was thank you, Jared, my wife. So Roger Corman, Scorsese worked for him. Anyway, so Roger Corman did all our effects and they did it really cheap. And so that was Jim's contribution to the movie. And then of course he did a couple movies that were sort of successful.
Just a couple, yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of funny, isn't it? You go through the
it's
people
incredible.
that you cross, you know, in the business. I remember George Lucas coming to set on Close Encounters, and he said, "Oh my God, we never built anything like this. We just built the same set and we just repainted it to have people." And so the irony is, I lost the Art Direction Academy Award to Star Wars. And they were all English crew, but I won the British Academy Award so it was sort of funny. Anyway,
Awesome.
So Cameron was very, very helpful. And he said some years later in an article that really helped the studio. Corman's was in trouble. They needed some work. And anyway, he did a good job.
That's incredible. Well, Joe, I think we could talk to you all day, but I would love to know what your books' names are and where people can find it. Are they on Amazon?
Here we go. This is, okay. And what this book has, just all the storyboards that I did, shot for shot.
That's awesome.
It has the illustrations I talked about in the beginning, you know, before we had a movie. Dennis Prince did a great job. Actually, here's my set breakdown, page by page.
Oh, that's awesome.
On how we used to do it. And what you do is very early on, like for an example, here's, you see, you're reading the script, you say, oh, I need a shark and a boat, and that's the beginning of a shark. So the book is very, very complete. It shows the starting, the building, this
That's awesome.
framework for the shark. And here's, I showed you before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Amazon. You could get it at Amazon, and it's not that expensive. I think it's only $26. Also, here's something else. People want my illustrations and storyboards. You could get those on Joe Alves, movieart.com. And, they're copies of that stuff.
Cool.
But the book has been well received, and Dennis did such a good job. It's more about, not so much about me, but it's about the period of how we did it back then. You know, very small crew. I had a carpenter and a painter, and an interesting thing about Martha's Vineyard, because it was a lot of rich people lived there. And, I remember Walter Cronkite I ran into. him. And, Zanuck, who is also a rich guy, didn't think that people would want their movie shot there. But you got a lot of people that needed work. So having just a painter and a carpenter, I hired boat builders and I hired all the locals to work. And then Stephen was smart enough to hand these selectmen and gave them parts in the movie, So it worked out pretty good. Other than the water, it was an incredible good shoot.
That's awesome. So can they find the book anywhere else? So we have Amazon. We have your illustrations on the site. What about your Close Encounters book? Where is that? Is it Amazon?
That would, we ran out of that one. Here's what happened with that. No, but Amazon, you could get it really quick on Amazon, and it's the best price. And then you could look at this for other stuff. We may print here's what happened with Universal, we had no problem. And with Spielberg, Steven's been so great. Anything we wanted. But with Close Encounters, it was Columbia, and then Sony bought them, and they claimed they owned everything, even snapshots that I took of Stephen and Vilmos together. Oh, no, they wanted possession of everything. And so we ended up just, Dennis and I, publishing it ourselves, and we sold out pretty quick on that. But it was a small book. But I think people have had really very complimentary things to say about the Jaws book.
Sure.
Because not too many books, they're books about movies are pretty much made about actors or directors, not about designers or cameramen, things like that.
Yeah,
so I feel very, very pleased with it.
I can't wait to buy the book. I am a huge Jaws fan, and I want to thank you very, very much for being responsible for one of my favorite movies of all time. I just bought it on 4K. I've officially owned it on VHS, Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, and now 4K, and digitally. So.
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah, the 4K. This year, beginning this year, was quite a thing because it's the 45th anniversary. So the studio called me, Universal, and had me do a lot of podcasts to promote, the various, 4K stuff that they had out. So it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Can we find you online anywhere? Is there a Facebook page? Is there a Twitter handle you like to use? Or anything?
Gary, Facebook page, me?
Yeah, well,
what is
yes,
it?
You do. It's just under, I think it's Joel's official Facebook.
Yeah, just look for Joel's official page.
Awesome.
And then, yeah, there should be stuff there. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joe, for coming on. We appreciate it. Justin and I are absolutely flattered. I could probably talk to you for another 4 hours about Jaws and all the other stuff that you've done. We didn't really get into some of your TV work or anything, but maybe somewhere down the line. But thank you so much for coming on, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you,
very
guys.
much.
My